Yeah, man, I'll tell you what, that dang old internet, man, you just go on there and point and click, get in there and talk about www. Call me,
For some reason or another, you sound a little taller on radio.
Well, for my money, he's got all the facial characteristics of a criminal.
Now, here's your host, that gravy sopping, crappie flopping, stump jumping, Bible thumping, gun toting, mater growing son of a gun, the backwoods Baptist himself, Pastor Harold Smith.
Well, look who just got home. Oh, I've been home for a while. If you follow the podcast for any length of time, you know that we are just completing the first ever, I almost said first annual, but I don't think it'll be in the cards to do every year. We completed the Backwoods Baptist American Tour, where I went across the country interviewing pastors that I have made friends with. I interviewed some deacons, some non-pastors, some ministry supporters. You name it. I interviewed a lot of people, and in doing so, I recorded some great comments, great conversations. I continue to get a lot of good feedback from the American Tour. It seems like every couple of days I will get a email or a phone call or a text message or a comment on one of the videos or one of the podcasts saying how much this particular conversation or this whole tour has helped them. And I think it was beneficial, but it was definitely trying on my part. I guess what I would say is I drove everywhere I went, and we put 12,991 miles, business miles, on the car during this about roughly 6-week time of recording all those. We wrapped that up in mid-September. On the calendar, today is the 15th of November. So for the last 2 months, we've just been running out. Every 5 days, we've ran out another conversation. And the last one was Brandon White at Landmark Missionary Baptist Church in Granite Bay, California. That was the last interview that we did on the American Tour. And so we're back to just, you're going to get me from time to time. I mean, I've got some things I want to talk about, and I've got some local pastors with topics they want to talk about. And they've listened to me interview Terry Basham in Northern Michigan or John Shearhart in Northern Michigan. Or they've listened to me interview a pastor from South Georgia. And they're like, yeah, I want to talk about this. We need to get together and talk about this. And I'm looking forward to some of those. But I also have thought of some things I would like to say during all this traveling time. And I've got a few topics that I'd like to discuss. And the one we're going to talk about today is small churches. That's always been a big part of my ministry, but it is one of the, it's an area of concern, especially in light of what I'm seeing going on in the major Baptist groups in our area. So we'll get into that in a minute. Right now, I've got a little downtime, and I just want to brag a little bit. I killed a 10-point buck this morning. It's the second weekend of modern gun season in Arkansas. I tagged my second and final buck tag today. I killed a 10-point this morning. I killed an 8-point on opening morning. That was the first time I went hunting all year. I went hunting, and I wasn't in the woods maybe 45 minutes, 30, 45 minutes. I killed an 8-point on opening day. And so then the work started. I've been free to hunt a little since then. I've seen some smaller bucks. I went out today and just saw a really big 10-point, about a 230-yard shot, and it didn't drop. It ran, but it didn't go far. And I hit it right where I was aiming. And so anyways, this is one of the biggest bucks I've killed in a while. If you're watching on video, I'll put a picture in somewhere in through here. But basically, I prayed and asked God for a little time. kind of rest, because there were stretches during this American tour where I had a month. I never had a day off. I would, let's just say, for example, I'd get home Wednesday night at 10 o'clock. I'd carry all my suitcases in. I'd crash in my bed, get up the next morning, and I'd throw clothes in the laundry room. My wife would wash clothes and take stuff to the cleaners or pick up stuff at the cleaners. I would come to the bookstore, restock books, deposit ministry checks, pay bills. And it was a day of just basically doing paperwork. And then we left the next day. And I did that for about 5 straight weeks. We took a couple days off in northern Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula. We stayed a couple nights motel stay. I didn't have anywhere to speak or preach or interview anyone. So really, I went about 5 weeks with 2 days off. And when I got finished with the tour, I preached 2 or 3 revivals, a wild game dinner. I filled in a few places. There was just a lot of preaching opportunities. Now I've hit November and I've got a free schedule, and it's okay. I'm thankful that the Lord has given me a little time down. Now still running the bookstore, still having the pastor lunches each month. We're still, I still get a lot of phone calls. I still work with churches. I have ministry things to do, but I'm not scheduled to preach anywhere. So that little bit of downtime, I'm going to try to build a shed at my house. I have a guy from church, Alan Mack's been coming over. He's going to build it. I'm going to hand him nails and gopher tools and anything he needs to do. He's a builder. I'm a preacher. I know how to stay in my lane and help. And so during this downtime, the squirrels and the ducks better beware, because I'm out of buck tags, so I'm not going to be shooting any more deer, at least not in Arkansas, because I don't have any more Arkansas tags. But I plan on squirrel hunting and duck hunting for the rest of the year, and going into the Christmas holiday season. And then I already have a couple of churches contacting me to preach in January. So maybe I'll go back into the itinerant ministry. I don't know what the Lord has for me. Maybe a church will contact me wanting me to be their interim pastor and help them get back on track. I don't know. My heart's desire since I began preaching was for small churches. And I want to make a plea today for small churches. We're living in a time where small churches are looked down upon. As a matter of fact, we're in a time where a lot of people won't even visit a small church if they're looking for a church to attend, because they just automatically assume that it doesn't have anything to offer them, or it's probably small because it's a fussing and fighting church. And that's true. It may not have a lot of programs to offer your children. It may be small because they fired every preacher they've ever had. The deacons have fought like stepbrothers. I don't know. None of us know. And a lot of times small churches close because, look, God's no longer glorified in them. But here's what I've discovered. I've discovered that there are a lot of really good small churches. Now, I'm going to define small church. 100 or less is going to be my description of a small church. Now, I understand some of you guys are like, 100 people, that's giant church. Yeah, but I got to draw the line somewhere. And if I draw it at 50, somebody's going to say, well, we have 60 and our church is still small. So it's 100 people. If you're regularly running 100 in attendance, then I'm just going to guess that, you're growing. The church that I'm a member of, West Park Baptist Church in Ozark, we run over 100 a lot on Sunday mornings. And I would say we're a pretty good sized church. Yet when I go to other parts of the country, if your church ain't running 200 or 300, you're a small church. So you take this for however you want. But I think that we're missing a lot of things in small churches that we're just not getting in large churches. Now, let me start off before any large church pastor gets thrown out of a harness and upset and running wild. There's nothing holy. There's nothing super spiritual. There's nothing extra, great about being a small church. Churches, in my opinion, shouldn't stay small unless they're in an area with a small population. A church should really be defined by the population in the area. We should be seeking the souls that live in the area, and we should be seeking to see them saved. And if we're like John MacArthur was in Grace Community Church, their regular Sunday morning attendance was in the thousands, like over 10,000. But he's in an area that has tens of millions of people within an hour's drive of him. If you're in the prairie in North Dakota, or like Robbie McClellan in South Dakota, Robbie, doesn't have 15,000 people within an hour's drive. If everybody there went to his church, he would never duplicate what John MacArthur did during his ministry. So there's nothing holy about it. There's nothing superior. If you're in a small church, great. If you're in a large church, great. You don't have to apologize for being in a big church. You don't have to apologize for being in a small church. But here's what I do want to say. The church's fellowship is better in small churches that are biblically healthy. And here's why. You can know everyone in the entire church. You can literally know every person in your congregation. Every person can know their pastor. This is another big thing. How do you trust a pastor you can't ever talk to? How do you trust a pastor you can't ever spend time with? How do you evaluate that pastor's home life if you're never around his wife and kids? How do you know he's even qualified according to 1 Timothy 3 or Titus 1 if you have no personal interaction with him? And that's what I'm driving at here. The fellowship is way better in a biblically sound, healthy church. Now look, I know there's small churches out there and people won't come up and shake your hand, and it's this little clique and it's this little holy group that's over here and it's got this little holy group. I get it. There's large churches the same way. I'm talking about for an entire congregation to know each member, to be invested in each member, to love and care for them. Here's what has to happen. You have to know them. The fellowship is better. The intimacy is better. It's better because everybody's all together in the service. If God does a great work, uses a message in a powerful way in a service, and stirs hearts, if everybody's in that service, the whole church experienced that. Instead, what you find in a larger church is, boy, you guys should have been here for second service. Y'all missed it. Well, we went to early service, or we went to late service, or whatever. We go to the modern, hip, trendy worship service. If everybody's in the same service, everybody's engaged in what God is doing in the corporate worship service. And let me just go ahead and tell all you hyper cessationist people, God can do things and move in miraculous ways without people speaking in tongues, flopping on the floor like a fish on dry land. God can stir hearts, bring conviction, empower people to make God-honoring decisions and commitments in one service that he doesn't do in the other. And if your church is gathered in one service as it should be, then it's more intimate. It's more united. It's closer together. You just can't have that if you're sitting on this side of the church, 250 yards that way, on the other side of the arena is your Sunday school teacher. Way back here in the back, 19 rows deep, is the person that leads the small group on Wednesdays. No, you ought to be able to get up and shake everybody's hand in the course of a choir singing a song or letting out. Yes, I still believe we ought to shake hands in a church service. I think it ought to be a part of the service. Well, Brother Harold, you can shake hands before service and after service. I know, and I can shake hands during the service if I'm leading it. Let's all get up and shake hands. Well, I don't like shaking all these people's hands. Look, if you know them, you love them, you're fulfilling the 76 one another passages in the New Testament, you're going to be doing more than shaking hands. You're probably going to be hugging necks and slapping backs and crying together and laughing together and eating together when it's all over. We shouldn't be afraid of getting out and socializing for a few minutes during a worship service. It's actually one of the most biblical things that we could do. The intimacy, the fellowship, it's all there in a small church. Now, I know what all you large churches are saying. We have small groups. We do that in small groups. I get it. I agree. But here's what I often see in larger churches. I've pastored some larger churches. I've been a member of a couple of larger churches, and what I typically find is the young people are over here, the middle-aged people are over here, the old people are over here, and you just basically have three churches operating by a small group, and small groups usually going by age because these people want to be in bed by 5. These people have to be at the ball field on Saturday night till midnight. These people over here, are empty nesters, and they're just realizing that they can take a vacation when school's not in session and have the whole beach to themselves, and they're gone. We're in different stages of life. In the larger church, small group ministry is where we have that individual one-on-one accountability. It's harder to spread it out. Yes, there are ways to do it. W.A. Criswell, when he pastored First Baptist Dallas, I believe it was the largest Southern Baptist church at the time, or for many of those years, they never had a Sunday school class that ran over 20 people except one that met in the sanctuary, and everybody else was in small groups. And so small groups are how they handled the intimacy and the fellowship and all that. But let me be very clear. Sunday school, or your fancy little name of small group, can't replace the corporate worship gathering and the corporate fellowship, and a good old-fashioned potluck dinner can't be duplicated in a church of 500 like it can be in a church of 100 or less. When you start getting larger, you have to start organizing things. All right, everybody whose last name starts with A to C, bring bread. Everybody whose last name from D to G, you bring potatoes. You start having to break things up in some unnatural way to function. I'm making the case that small churches have some benefits that large churches just can't simply produce. Try as they may, administrate as good as they can, I still don't think you can pull it off. My parents attend a large church. Their pastor is a great pastor. He's doing a tremendous job. The church has a lot of things. My parents are active in the church. My dad's a deacon, or he was a deacon. I'm assuming he still is a deacon there, unless I don't know how they do deacons, but my mom teaches Sunday school. My parents are active in a large church. It's not bad. But there's things going on in small churches that the large churches are missing out on. And so what we run into is we try to shelf small churches like, well, we should only have small churches in little rural towns out on the prairie of South Dakota. We should only have small churches in little, suburb towns. No. We should have churches in every single neighborhood. Instead of buying 15 acres, spending the Lord's money to buy a 15-acre tract of land, spending the Lord's money to build a $8.7 million worship center. The Jews had the temple. They had one in the whole country, and God laid it out, not you. How about we have 20 neighborhood churches in the city instead of one giant one where you're basically herded in like cattle. The pastor has to be done at a certain time because this class starts at a certain time. The next group has to come in. If he got something on his heart and, well, we'll just have to cut it off. It's time for class 2 and session 1. And where's God in all that? I think we've missed something. Look, I'm not saying close the big church. I'm not saying you even need to leave a big church if you're in it. Big church can be good. There are things there that little churches can't do. You say, well, Brother Harold, why are you spending all this time advocating for small churches? Here's why. And this is what set me on this whole rabbit trail. I have been looking at planting. I'm not going to be the church planter. I'm a revitalization guy. I go to an existing church, help them get back on track. Several people have approached me about planting a church in this area where I live at, the River Valley of Western Arkansas. I have a building here. We're coming to you from the fellowship area and the book overflow of the Backwoods Book Company. I have a building in downtown Van Buren. I mean, we could start a Bible study in the room that I'm recording this podcast in. So people have came to me and said, would you help? Would you? And I said, look, I'll be glad to help. Be glad to make my building available. I'll be glad to, whatever you need done. Fill in if the pastor's sick, whatever you need done, I'll be glad to do it. But I'm not a church planter. So I decided to do some legwork. Where are the churches? Well, what areas missing a decent church? So Southern Baptist are the largest Baptist group in our neck of the woods. So I jump online and I pull up Southern Baptist churches. And the first thing I noticed, because I know where there's not any churches, and I just want to make sure I'm not missing something here. First thing I notice is that the churches I'm looking at on their map put out by the Southern Baptist on their website, the churches are closed. I don't mean like closed. I mean, they're shut down. The local Baptist Association in my area of Western Arkansas and the River Valley, do your own homework. The local Baptist Association in my area has auctioned off, I think, 3 buildings in the last year. When I say buildings, I mean churches. They've auctioned off 3 church buildings in this area that I know of in the last year. So closed the church, dismantled the body, took the building, auctioned it off. They sold the hymnals, they sold the pews, they sold the Sunday school chairs, sold the parking lots, everything sold. But they're still listed on their website as a church, a Southern Baptist church in the area. These churches they closed were not little one-room schoolhouses out on the prairie. One of these churches was half a city block. And it was in a great neighborhood, in a busy area. And I was like, why did this building close? Why was it auctioned off? Then another building, not as nice of a neighborhood, a little rougher, I would say, sold off, auctioned it off. It's now some kind of food pantry, clothing drive place, something else. I'm not 100% sure what it is. Still listed as a church, Southern Baptist Church. Still shows to be a open and, a church you could attend. One of the other churches was also about a half a city block. Fairly good neighborhood. They merged with another church. They sold the building, auctioned everything off. It's now something else. As I began to look around, I noticed that there were a lot of churches listed that have been closed for years. As a matter of fact, the church that I drove by, if you've ever heard my testimony, I drove past a church that was closing 20 years ago now. As I drove past that church over and over and over while I was going bear hunting, they couldn't keep a pastor. Nobody wanted to go out there. And I was arguing with God, like, why? How could you let this church die? God's response was, why don't you go pastor it? And then conviction hit all over me. That's where I got my burden for little small churches. That church sold 10 years ago, a decade ago. The church building sold, the property went to someone else. Someone owns it. I don't know. It's Airbnb or a house or what. I don't know what it is today. It's still listed as a functioning Southern Baptist church. It's been closed for 10 years. What's up with the Southern Baptists refusing to take these churches down? Now look, well, Brother Harold, they didn't know. This map that I'm looking at is not 2 years old. It's their strategic map about where they need churches. How in the world can you even have that accurate if you've put churches into your system that have been closed for a decade? Well, I got all worked up about this. I started seeing all these closed churches still listed as open. I think I come up with a half a dozen on their map in my area that are closed. Well, I got all worked up. These churches were not all rural out in the middle like the one I just mentioned. Some of them are downtown, good side of town, busy places. They sold, they closed, they auctioned them off. I called a pastor that's a lot more connected than me in another state, and I kind of ranted to him about it a little bit. He's a little more involved in the Southern Baptist Convention than I am. And he said, hey, they're doing the same thing here. And I said, why are they closing the little churches? He said, the push is to go to this urban initiative and plant bigger churches. It's to pour our efforts and resources into some larger flagship churches and grow them and close the little ones. Well, why are we closing the little ones? None of us can know for certain because no one said, hey, here's why associations are selling their buildings or buildings in the churches and their association, closing them down. No one's told me, but I can only guess why, and here's what my guess is, and it's a guess. They're selling them, and they're putting the money in the coffers. In other words, they're using the sale of these buildings to fund the association because virtually every association that I know anything about is not receiving the same level of support. Number one, these little bitty churches they're closing were the biggest givers percentage-wise. They're closing. They're dying. They're struggling. They would rather have the sale of their building one time and put that money in the bank than they would have their little meager 10% of the offering each month. So they've chosen to sell the buildings, dismantle the congregations, tell them to go to the big church. By the way, the big church in our area, one of the big Baptist churches in our area, bought land in a prominent up-and-coming side of town, I forgot, the numbers are all over the place, 20 acres, 10 acres, I'm not sure. They bought multiple acres. Their payments are tens of thousands of dollars a month, and they're hoping to relocate to this property and build and go in more debt to have a bigger church. When I'm sitting here looking at the landscape going, if we still had these churches in the neighborhood. Now, I anticipate your argument if you're Southern Baptist. Well, those little churches you're talking about were dysfunctional. Well, here's a novel idea. Guys like me go into dysfunctional churches and turn them around. I don't have the power to keep a candlestick lit. It's the Lord's church. But the Lord, since the days of the writing of the New Testament, has used men that are uniquely gifted to go into problem churches and give them the wisdom, insight, and biblical direction to get back on track. Timothy was one of those men. We call Timothy the evangelist. We say Timothy was a missionary. Timothy wasn't so much planting churches as much as he was staying in churches that Paul had planted. Yes, Timothy was part of the planting team, but what was he doing back at Ephesus? What was he doing at Corinth? Titus would be another great example. Paul's writing to the church at Corinth, and he's telling them all this stuff that needs to be done. He said, I tried to get Apollos to come here. This is an existing church. This is not an apostle returning with apostolic authority. This is an apostle sending somebody to a church in decline, that has the wisdom, the insight to get going. Apollos says, I can't do it. I'm busy in this work. So he sends Titus in his place. And then when he writes to Titus on the island of Crete, Apollos is there too. What's Apollos doing? He's going to existing churches and fixing their problem through biblical instruction, wisdom, and leadership. What I'm seeing going down, not just in the Southern Baptist Convention, I'm seeing it in every major Baptist group. And I'm talking to Baptists because all the rest of y'all have somebody else, some headquarters somewhere, telling you what to do. You have some synod somewhere or some church hierarchy or some, board of bishops that tell preachers where to go. Baptists are independent and autonomous. Southern Baptists, Missionary Baptists, ABA and BMA. Those are the groups in our area. And they're closing small churches. And I'm over here saying, would any church that's small like to try to get out of the shape they're in? I'd be willing to come and devote my time and attention to it. The Southern Baptists are saying, hey, just give us the keys to your building, give us what's left in your bank account, we'll liquidate everything and send it to missions. That's how I got in this ministry. I'm sure Michael Sanchez won't mind me saying this, but Bloomer Baptist Church in Bloomer, Arkansas, I heard word that the director of missions and the Baptist Association they were in said, look, you guys are too small. Y'all don't want to get with the program. Y'all don't want to get young preachers and bright lights and all the things we want. So we're not going to help you find your next pastor. Just give us your keys in your building and your bank account, and we'll spend it on missions for you. Y'all go somewhere else. I heard that. And I thought, who in the world is this guy to be telling a church what to do, especially in closing? So I said, hey, tell them to call me. I'll find them a preacher. They called me. I found a pastor. It's been like 6 or 7 years. That pastor's still there. The church is about 4 times the size it was back then. It's happy. It's healthy. They're growing. They're engaged in missions. Why? Because small churches matter. This little old town that this little church is in is just a wide spot in the road, but it deserves a gospel preaching church with people that believe the Bible to model it in that community. And there's nothing more important than Bloomer, Arkansas, having a biblically sound Baptist church in its midst. I'm sick and tired of pouring everybody into one big ministry ran by a group of people behind closed doors that make decisions without consulting the congregation. And the reason being is because, well, the congregation's too big. We couldn't just have an old-fashioned business meeting. They'd have too many questions. They had one in Jerusalem. They had one in Antioch. I could find them all throughout Scripture in large churches. You're just saying that because you don't want the people you pastor to have any input in what's going on in your church. And that's why we're seeing this pushing up of large ministries. And look, if you pastor a big church, you're not the bad guy. You're not less than a small church. But it's the small churches that are being told to close. It's the small churches that are being pushed out. It's the small churches that are being liquidated to fund the ministry of the larger churches and Baptist associations, primarily Southern Baptist associations. But I can show you missionary Baptist churches that sold their buildings, emptied their bank account, and they just spread it around the existing missionary Baptist churches who are doing exactly what the one that closed did, and they're all just dying slowly. Friend, my plea, and I'll wrap this up. We're past 30 minutes. My plea is this. Let's invest in small churches. Let's fix them, and let's keep them. If you're in a small church and you've got a good pastor, get behind that pastor, love and support him, and tell the world that you've got a good pastor that preaches the Word of God. You've got a church that loves each other. They don't fuss. They don't fight. They love their pastor. They love one another. You ought to come and experience what we got, because you can't get this in a big church. Questions, complaints, conundrums, comments, smart remarks, you can send them all to me at backwoodsbaptist.com. If you haven't got my newsletter, about once every 2 or 3 months, I send out an update of what all's been going on and sometimes some of the plans I have for the future. You can sign up for that also at backwoodsbaptist.com. And remember this, if you're ever in Van Buren, Arkansas on a Saturday from 9 to 5, come down to 522 Main Street. We'll give you a free book at the Backwoods Book Company. Till next time, we will see you somewhere in the backwoods, probably in a small church.